The air was thick with the sharp temps of gunpowder, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked dirt of the old shooting range. Sarah Miller stood at the edge, her boots scuffing the ground, her old Remington 700 rifle slung over her shoulder. At 42, she was no stranger to hard work or long days. Her flannel shirt faded from years of wear, her hands rough from stacking lumber at the hardware store. But today wasn't about work. It was about the one thing that brought her peace: shooting. The range was her sanctuary, where the world's noise faded, and all that mattered was the steady rhythm of her breath and the pull of the trigger. But today, that sanctuary was barred. A line of black SUVs had rolled in an hour earlier, disgorging. A dozen SWAT officers in full tactical gear, chest plates, holsters, and rifles that gleamed with high-tech precision. They moved with the confidence of men who owned the ground they walked on, their voices loud and clipped as they set up their targets. Sarah had watched from the parking lot, assuming she'd wait her turn. This was a public range, after all, and she'd been coming here for years. But when she approached, rifle case in hand, the team's captain, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, held up a hand like she was a stray dog wandering too close. "This range is reserved," he said, barely glancing at her. "SWAT training. No civilians today." His tone was final, dismissive, as if Sarah's presence was an inconvenience he didn't have time for. The other officers didn't even look up, too busy adjusting their scopes or joking among themselves. To them, she was invisible, a middle-aged woman in worn clothes. No threat, no relevance. Sarah's hazel eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance flaring beneath her calm exterior. She wasn't one to make a scene, but she also wasn't one to be pushed aside. Growing up on a small farm, she'd learned to handle a rifle before she could drive. Taught by her father, a quiet man who believed skills spoke louder than words. She could still hear his voice. "Hold steady, Sarah. Let the shot prove who you are."
Oh.
Those lessons had carried her through decades of practice. From plinking cans in the backyard to hitting bullseyes at 200 yards, shooting wasn't just a hobby, it was part of her, woven into her bones. "Reserved?" she repeated, her voice low but firm. "This is a public range. I've got as much right to shoot here as you do." The few of the officers glanced over, now smirking, their eyes flicking from her scuffed boots to the battered rifle case in her hand. One muttered something to his buddy, and they both chuckled. The captain sighed, like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "Lady, we're professionals. This isn't a place for whatever you're doing. Come back tomorrow."
Oh.
The word "lady" dripped with condescension, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She wasn't naive. She knew how she looked to them. No tactical gear, no badge, no swagger. Just a simple woman who probably couldn't tell a trigger from a safety. But they didn't know her. They didn't know the hours she'd spent in the pre-dawn chill, sighting in her rifle, while her daughter Lily slept in the truck. They didn't know the pride she felt when she hit a target so clean it looked like the bullet had kissed it. And they sure didn't know the fire that burned in her when someone told her she didn't belong. "I'm not leaving," she said, planting her feet. The captain raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to being challenged, especially not by someone. Like her, the other officers were watching now, their smirks fading into curiosity. A small crowd of regulars, hunters, and hobbyists who knew Sarah from the range had started to gather, sensing something brewing. Among them was Lily, her 14-year-old daughter, her wide eyes fixed on her mom. Sarah caught her gaze and felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just about her. Anymore, it was about showing Lily what it meant to stand tall. The captain crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin. "You want to play tough? Fine. Let's make it interesting," he gestured. To the range where his team was setting up targets at 300 yards. "Outshoot my men, and you can have the range. One shot each. Your choice of target. But if you miss, you're done here for the day, and you don't come back whining." His lips curled into a smirk, certain she'd back down. His team snickered. Again, one of them muttering, "This'll be quick." She knew the odds were stacked against her, an old hunting rifle against their state-of-the-art gear, a civilian against trained marksmen. But she also knew her own hands, her own heart. She'd faced worse than a smug SWAT team, years of scraping by. raising Lily alone, proving herself in a world that often overlooked her. This was just another challenge, and Sarah Miller didn't back down from those, deal, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The captain blinked, caught off guard by her confidence, but he recovered quickly, barking orders to his team to prepare. The crowd buzzed, phones coming out to record what was shaping up to be the range's most unexpected showdown. Sarah sat, her rifle case on a nearby bench, her movements deliberate, ignoring the whispers and stares. She could feel Lily's eyes on her, full of belief, and it steadied her. This wasn't just about a shooting spot anymore. It was about pride. It's about proving that skill and grit could outshine arrogance and gear. As she opened her case, revealing the worn but meticulously maintained Remington, one of the officers scoffed. "That's what she's using? My grandpa's got a better gun in his attic." Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her father had always said a rifle was only as good as the person holding it, and Sarah had spent a lifetime proving him right. She loaded a single round, the click of the bolt loud in the sudden quiet. The SWAT team was ready, their targets set, their confidence unshaken. But Sarah wasn't shaken either. She was ready to show the man the world what a simple woman could do. Sarah Miller wasn't a woman who sought the spotlight. She was the kind of person you'd pass in the grocery store without a second-glance flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face lined from years of hard work and quiet resilience. At 42, she carried the weight of a life that hadn't been easy. A single mom since Lily was born, she'd raised her daughter on a shoestring budget, working long shifts at the local hardware store, hauling lumber and ringing up nails for contractors who barely noticed her, hands rough as sandpaper. Told a story of late nights fixing leaky pipes in their rented trailer, of teaching herself to change a car's oil because she couldn't afford a mechanic. But those hands also knew the smooth wood of her rifle, the cold metal of its bolt, the delicate balance of a trigger pull. Shooting was Sarah's refuge, her one rebellion against a world that demanded she stay small. It started on her family's farm, where her father, a man of few words but deep wisdom, handed her a .22 rifle at age 12. "This ain't about noise," he'd said, pointing to a tin can perched on a fence post. "It's about focus. Make it count." Sarah had spent her childhood mastering that focus, graduating from cans to clay pigeons to distant targets, her aim growing sharper with every shot. By her teens, she could outshoot her cousins, who teased her mercilessly until she'd plink. A bottle cap at 100 yards. Her father would just nod, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "That's my girl." When her father passed away, he left her his Remington 700, a no-frills hunting rifle that had seen decades of use. It wasn't much to look at scratches on the stock, a barrel polished smooth from years of cleaning, but to Sarah, it was a piece of him, a reminder of the lessons he'd taught her: patience, precision, and the quiet power of proving yourself. Without a word, she'd kept it meticulously maintained, spending what little extra money she had on quality ammo and range fees. Every Saturday, when Lily was old enough to tag along, Sarah would drive them to the range, the rifle case rattling in the bed of her beat-up pickup. She'd set up her targets, teach Lily how to spot for her, and lose herself in the rhythm of load, aim, fire. Those moments were theirs, a bond forged in the smell of gunpowder and the clang of steel. Now, standing at the range, Sarah felt the weight of that history as the SWAT team's laughter cut through the air. "She's got no chance," one officer scoffed, adjusting his high-tech rifle with its gleaming scope. "Bet she can't even hit the broadside of a barn," another chimed in, his voice dripping with mockery. The words hit like a slap, but Sarah didn't flinch. She'd heard worse customers at the store who assumed she couldn't lift a bag of cement, landlords who raised an eyebrow at a single mom signing a lease. She'd learned long ago that people's doubts were their problem, not hers. But today, those doubts weren't just about her. They were about Lily, standing at the edge of the crowd, her 14-year-old face a mix of pride and worry. Sarah caught her daughter's gaze, and something fierce stirred inside her. This wasn't just about proving herself. It was about showing Lily that no one, not even a team of elite officers, could tell them they didn't belong. Sarah set her rifle case on a bench, ignoring the SWAT team's smirks. She opened it with care, revealing the Remington, its simplicity stark against the officer's tactical gear. One of them snorted. "That's her weapon? Looks like it belongs in a museum." Sarah let the comment slide, her focus narrowing. She wasn't here to trade barbs or flash credentials she didn't have. She had no formal training, no medals, no badge. What she had was years of practice, a rifle she knew like her own heartbeat, and a fire in her gut that burned hotter with every snide remark. She thought of the countless mornings she'd woken before dawn, driving to the range while Lily slept in the passenger seat, bundled in a blanket. She thought of the times she'd skipped a new pair of shoes to afford a box of ammo, the nights she'd cleaned her rifle by lamplight after Lily was in bed. Every shot she'd ever taken had led to this moment, as the SWAT team set up their 300-yard targets. Sarah knelt by her case, checking her rifle with the calm of a ritual. She ran her fingers over the bolt, smooth from years of use, and loaded. A single round, the brass glinting in the sun. The crowd was growing, regulars from the range whispering her name, their phones out to capture what was unfolding. Sarah didn't care about the cameras. She cared about the girl in the crowd. The one who'd grown up watching her mom face down a world that tried to keep her small. Lily's belief in her was a tether, grounding her against the SWAT team's arrogance, the captain's smirk, the weight of every eye on her. Sarah stood, rifle in hand, and faced the range. The officers' laughter faded as they sensed something shift in the air. She wasn't just a simple woman anymore. She was a mother, a daughter, a shooter with nothing to prove to anyone but herself. She was ready. The sun hung high, casting sharp shadows across the range as the SWAT team prepared to demonstrate their prowess. The air crackled with anticipation. The crowd of onlookers, hunters, hobbyists, and curious locals hushed as the officers lined up. These were no ordinary shooters. Clad in tactical vests, their rifles bristling with advanced optics and custom grips, they moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Each man carried the weight of rigorous training, countless hours on elite courses, and the unspoken confidence of those who knew they were the best. To them, this challenge was a formality, a brief detour before they sent the simple woman packing. The captain, a burly man named Holt, with a voice like gravel, barked orders, his team snapping to attention. "Let's show this lady how it's done," he said, his smirk directed at Sarah, stood quietly at the sidelines, her old rifle resting against a bench. The crowd shifted, phones raised to capture the spectacle. Lily, standing among them, clutched her hands, her eyes darting between her mom and the officers. The regulars who knew Sarah exchanged glances, their whispers tinged with hope but tempered by doubt. These were SWAT marksmen. After Al could a hardware store clerk really stand a chance? The rules were simple, one shot each at a 300-yard. Steel plate, the size of a dinner plate, a distance that tested even seasoned shooters. The SWAT team would go first, setting the bar, and Sarah would follow with her single shot. Holt had chosen the target deliberately, knowing 300 yards pushed the limits of a civilian's skill, especially with an outdated rifle like Sarah's. He expected her to falter, to miss by a mile, giving his team a story to laugh about over beers later. But as the officers prepped, Sarah's calm demeanor unsettled him. A flicker of doubt he quickly shoved aside. The first officer, a lean man with a sniper's cool detachment, stepped to the firing line. His rifle, a sleek AR-10 with a high-powered scope, gleamed in the sunlight. He adjusted his stance, his movements fluid, and peered through the optics, zeroing in on the distant target. The crowd held its breath. Crack! The shot rang out, sharp and clean, followed by a satisfying clang. As the steel plate rocked on its stand, the spotter called it dead center. Cheers erupted, and the officer stepped back, a faint nod of satisfaction on his face. Holt clapped him on the shoulder, his grin widening. "That's how you start, boys." The second officer, younger and eager to prove himself, was next. His rifle, another high-tech model, sported a custom compensator to reduce recoil. He took his time, adjusting his scope with meticulous care, his brow furrowed in concentration. The crowd's murmurs grew, quieter, the tension palpable. Crack! The shot echoed, and the plate clanged again, But the spotter's call was less enthusiastic. Edge hit. Still counts. The officer's shoulders slumped slightly, but his teammates slapped his back, their confidence unshaken. A graze was. Still a hit, and they knew Sarah couldn't match even that. The third and fourth officers followed, their shots landing with varying degrees of precision. The third, a grizzled veteran, hit the plate solidly, though off-center, drawing a respectable nod from Holt. The fourth, a cocky sharpshooter with a reputation for flair, took a dramatic pause before firing, his shot striking the plate's upper. Half the crowd cheered each hit, but the regulars who knew Sarah's skill began to murmur. "She's hit harder targets than that," one said, glancing at her. Sarah didn't react, her eyes fixed on the range, studying each shot with the shooters. Instinct, noting the wind's subtle shifts, the sun's glare. Holt went last, determined to seal the deal. As team leader, he carried the weight of their reputation, and he wasn't about to let a civilian steal their thunder. His rifle, a top-of-a-line precision model, was the envy of the team. Its scope capable of picking out details at twice the distance. He settled into position, his broad frame steady as a rock, and took his time, adjusting for windage and elevation with the precision of a man who'd trained for high-stakes missions. The crowd fell silent, sensing the moment's weight. Shot would be the one to beat, the benchmark Sarah would have to surpass. Crack! The rifle roared, and the steel plate sang out with a piercing clang, spinning wildly on its mount. The spotter's call was immediate, bullseye. The crowd roared and Holt stood, his chest puffed out, turning to Sarah with a smug grin. "Oh, your move, lady," he said, his voice dripping with certainty. His team whooped, their camaraderie. A wall of confidence that seemed impenetrable. To them, the contest was over. Sarah was out of her league, her old rifle no match for their firepower. Her lack of tactical training a death sentence for her chances. But the crowd wasn't so sure. The regulars who'd seen Sarah drop targets with surgical precision leaned forward, their eyes on her. Lily's face glowed with quiet pride, her hands clasped tightly. Sarah stepped forward, her movements unhurried, her battered Remington looking almost comical next to the SWAT team's arsenal. The officer's laughter died down as she picked up her rifle, her hands steady, her face unreadable. She didn't have their gear, their training, or their swagger. But she had something they didn't, years of instinct. A bond with her rifle forged over decades, and a fire in her heart that burned brighter than their arrogance. The range fell. Silent, every eye on Sarah. Holt crossed his arms, his smirk fading as he sensed something in her calm, something he couldn't quite place. The wind stirred, kicking up dust, and Sarah glanced at the target, 300 yards away, a speck against the horizon. She was ready. The range fell into a hush so deep you could hear the wind rustling through the dry grass. Every eye was on Sarah Miller as she stepped to the firing line, her worn Remington 700 cradled in her hands. The steel plate, 300 yards away, glinted. In the midday sun, a tiny speck against the dusty horizon. To the SWAT team, it was a target they'd hit countless times in training. To Sarah, it was a challenge that carried the weight of every doubt she'd ever faced. The crowd locals, hunters, and her daughter, Lily, held their breath. Phones raised to capture what felt like a moment destined for legend. Captain Holt crossed his arms, his smirk barely concealing a flicker of unease. His team had set the bar high, and he was certain the simple woman would crumble under the pressure. Sarah didn't rush. She moved with the deliberate calm of someone who'd spent decades honing a craft. Her every action precise, almost reverent. She set her feet shoulder-width apart, her boots scuffing the dirt, grounding her against the weight of expectation. The Remington, scratched and weathered, looked out of place among the SWAT team's sleek rifles with their high-powered scopes and tactical mods. One officer muttered, "That thing's older than my dad," drawing a chuckle from his teammate. But Sarah didn't hear them more. If she did, she gave no sign. Her world had narrowed to the rifle, the target, and the steady rhythm of her own breath. She raised the rifle, her cheek pressing against the familiar wooden stock, worn smooth by years of use. The iron sights, simple and unadorned, aligned with her gaze. Unlike the SWAT team's scopes, which magnified the target to crystal clarity, Sarah relied on instinct and experience, her eyes trained to judge distance and wind by feel. The crowd's whispers faded. The officer's smirks blurred into the background. There was only the target, a dinner plate-sized circle 300 yards away, and the lessons her father had drilled into her. Breathe slow, aim true. Sarah inhaled, deeply, the scent of gunpowder and sun-baked earth filling her lungs. Her heart beat steady, a metronome honed by countless mornings at the range. When the world was still asleep and the only sound was the clang of steel, she exhaled, her body settling into a stillness that felt almost sacred. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, not pulling, but waiting, patient as a hunter. The wind stirred, a faint breeze from the left, and she adjusted her aim by a hair's breadth, compensating for the drift she'd learned to read on her own. Lily watched, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. She'd seen her mom shoot 100 times cans, clays, paper targets, but never like this. With a SWAT team's eyes boring into her back and a crowd holding its breath, Lily knew the stories, how Grandma had outshot her uncles as a kid, how her mom had kept the rifle clean, even when money was tight. To Lily, Sarah wasn't just a shooter. She was a hero, and this was her moment to prove it. The SWAT team's confidence wavered. Holt shifted his weight, his arms uncrossing, his jaw tightening as Sarah's stillness stretched on. One officer whispered, "What's she waiting for? She's scared?" But another, the veteran who'd hit third, shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "She's not scared. She's locked in." The crowd sensed it, too, a quiet power radiating from Sarah. A focus that made the high-tech gear around her seem irrelevant. Sarah's finger tightened. The trigger's resistance familiar, a friend she'd trusted for years. Time slowed, the world fading to a tunnel of focus. Crack! The shot exploded. The Remington's recoil a gentle push against her shoulder. The bullet tore through the air, a streak of purpose invisible to all but her. For a heartbeat, the range was silent, every eye straining for the target 300 yards away. Then clang. The steel plate spun wildly, struck with a force that echoed across the range like a THUNDERCLA. P. The crowd erupted, a tidal wave of gasps, cheers, and shouts. Lily jumped, her scream of yes, lost in the roar. The SWAT officers froze, their rifles lowering slightly, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Holt's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. Sarah lowered her rifle, her face calm, as if she'd just hit a soda can in her backyard. She didn't cheer or gloat. She simply stood, her hazel eyes steady on the target, her breathing even. Her victory quiet but undeniable. Holt snapped out of it, striding forward with a shout. "Check the target." His voice carried a mix of demand and desperation, as if he couldn't believe what he'd seen. The spotter ran down range, the crowd buzzing as he examined the plate. Phones zoomed in, capturing every second. The spotter turned, holding up a hand, his voice cutting through the noise. Dead center. Clean hole, tighter than any of ours. The announcement ignited another wave of cheers, the crowd surging forward, some clapping, others shaking their heads in awe. Holt reached the target, his eyes narrowing as he inspected the plate himself. There, it was a perfect hole, punched through the steel with surgical precision, outshining even his own bullseye. He turned back to Sarah, his face reddening, a mix of grudging respect and wounded pride. The SWAT team exchanged glances, looks, some nodding, others still processing. The regulars who'd known Sarah's skill whooped, one shouting, "That's our Sarah." Lily ran to her mom, throwing her arms around her, tears of pride in her eyes. "I knew you could do it, Mom." Sarah hugged her daughter, her expression softening for a moment. But as Holt approached, she straightened, meeting his gaze. He opened his mouth, then closed it, at a loss for words for the first time. The crowd was still roaring now, the moment already spiraling into something bigger, a story that would outlive this dusty afternoon. Sarah had done the impossible, not just hitting the target, but outshooting an elite team with a single bullet, proving that heart and skill could eclipse gear and swagger. The dust hadn't even settled on the range when the weight of Sarah Miller's shot began to ripple outward, transforming a quiet afternoon into the spark of a legend. Captain Holt, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and grudging respect, approached Sarah, the range keys dangling from his hand. The SWAT team stood behind him, their rifles lowered, their earlier smirks replaced by a stunned silence. Holt cleared his throat, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "You earned it," he muttered, extending the keys. "Range is yours." Sarah met his gaze, her hazel eyes steady, and took the keys with a simple nod. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, as if she hadn't just appended their world with a single bullet. The crowd was still buzzing, a chaotic mix of cheers, gasps, and excited chatter. Phones were out, videos already uploading to social media, capturing Sarah's perfect shot and the SWAT team's stunned faces. Lily clung to her mom's side, her 14-year-old face glowing with pride, her earlier worry replaced by a grin that wouldn't quit. "You were amazing, Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, a rare smile softening her weathered face. For Sarah, this moment wasn't about the crowd or the keys, it was about Lily, about showing her that no one, not even an elite team, could tell them they didn't belong. But the world had other plans for Sarah's story. By sundown, the first videos hit the internet, spreading like wildfire across platforms like wildfire. The hashtag Sharpshooter Mom trended overnight, with clips of Sarah's shot racking up millions of views. Comment sections exploded with reactions. "She smoked them with a grandpa rifle." "This is what happens when you underestimate a mom." Local news outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Small-town woman outshoots SWAT team in one shot, one legend." Reporters called the hardware store, hoping for an interview, but Sarah, true to form, waved them off. "Got work to do," she told her boss, who was fielding the calls with a grin. Sarah didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. The next morning, the range was packed not just with regulars, but with strangers who'd driven from neighboring towns to see the woman who'd taken down a SWAT team. They brought their own rifles, hoping to shoot alongside her, or just stood at the fence, watching as Sarah set up her targets with the same quiet focus as always. She didn't change her routine, didn't pose for photos or sign autographs, but when a shy teenage girl approached, asking for a shooting tip, Sarah paused, her voice gentle. "Keep your breathing steady," she said, demonstrating with her rifle. "The rest is just practice." The girl nodded, wide-eyed, and Sarah went back to her work, unaware that the exchange was already circulating online. Adding to her growing mythos, the SWAT team, meanwhile, had to eat their words. One of his men returned to their precinct, the story of their defeat trailing them like a shadow. Some officers grumbled, insisting Sarah's shot was a fluke, but others, like the veteran who'd sensed her skill, spoke up. "She's the real deal," he told his teammates. "We got schooled, plain and simple." Holt, to his credit, didn't dodge the truth. At their next training session, he brought up Sarah's shot, using it as a lesson in humility. "Never underestimate your opponent," he said, his voice gruff. "Doesn't matter what they look like or what they're carrying." The team even extended an invitation for Sarah to train with them, a gesture of respect. Sarah, ever practical, declined politely. "I've got my own range now," she said with a faint smile, and that was that. For Sarah, life went on, but it wasn't quite the same. The hardware store became a local attraction, customers lingering to ask about that SWAT story. Her boss, amused, gave her a raise, joking that she was good for business. Sarah used the extra money to buy Lily new boots and a better scope for her own rifle, one she'd been eyeing for years. She kept shooting every Saturday, teaching Lily the same lessons her father had taught her: how to read the wind, how to trust your hands, how to let your skills speak for itself. Lily soaked it up, her own aim improving, her confidence growing under her mom's quiet guidance. The range became a community hub, with Sarah as its unspoken center. Regulars who'd known her for years now saw her in a new light, their respect deepened by her feat. Newcomers, inspired by her story, showed up to learn, and Sarah, though never one for speeches, found herself sharing what she knew. She'd demonstrate a stance, adjust a beginner's grip, or point out a subtle wind shift. Her advice, simple but effective. "She's not just a shooter," one regular said. "She's a teacher, whether she means to be or not." Sarah's legacy wasn't just about that one shot. It was about what it represented. To Lily, it was proof that her mom could do anything. To the community, it was a reminder that talent could thrive in the unlikeliest places. Two women who heard her story, it was a call to stand tall, to claim their space no matter who tried to push them out. Online, her story inspired memes, fan art, and even a few tribute videos. One set to a country song about defying the odds. Sarah saw it all with a mix of amusement and bemusement. "Folks have too much time on their hands," she'd say, shaking. Her head butt deep down, Sarah knew what her shot had done. It had cracked open a door, not just for her, but for others who'd been told they didn't belong. She kept the range keys in her pocket, a quiet reminder of the day she'd stood up to doubt and won. Every time she pulled the trigger, she felt her father's presence, his voice whispering, "That's my girl." Sarah Miller, the sharpshooter mom, didn't need fame or fanfare. She had a rifle, her daughter, and a legacy that would echo far beyond that dusty range.